Good evening, Shortcuts. This is Stephen here. This is video one for the price list that will go out this Wednesday, October 9th at 9 p.m. Sydney time. If you would like to be on the price list, drop me an email at shortcutsrecords@gmail.com. Now, I've had a bit of fun with this first list this week. I have compiled 15 records that give a not complete, but I hope interesting overview of music in the UK in the 80s. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the 15 records I've selected here are all the greatest records of all time, but I'm going to paint a picture of the scene as a teenager. So I was born in 74, so I remember. I'm going to talk about actually the first single that I bought, which is related to something in here. But I remember the radio, and I also remember turning 15, 16 at the end of the 80s. And I'm going to start with a record that caught my attention and has remained really a touchstone of my love of music ever since. And I'm going to try and explain how you get to this place. So there you go. That's my challenge. I don't think I've charted the course perfectly, but I'm just going to talk and we'll see what happens. So, one thing before we get started, one of my all-time favorite artists, Chris Christopherson, passed away this week. And so what I'm doing, this is my favorite Chris Christopherson album. It's called Border Lord. It's an Australian first press. Everyone who buys a record this week will go on a draw, and I'm going to draw out a winner, and that winner will get this copy of Border Lord by the incredibly wonderful Chris Christopherson, who passed away this week. So someone will get an extra little goodie. All right, so where am I going to start? I'm going to start at the end. I'm going to start in March 1989. Now remember, all of these records are for sale, and I'll try and explain a few little things about them as we go. March 1989, why would I start there? Well, that was the month that the Stone Roses came out. This record blew my mind. And I don't mean that in anything other than literal figurative terms. I remember watching the Stone Roses singing, or not singing, the psychedelic video of Fool's Gold on Top of the Pops. Now, Top of the Pops in my house was family viewing. 7 p.m, BBC Two, Thursday evening. We all watched Top of the Pops as a family. We wanted to find out who was number one. We had our favourites we would debate. The video for Fool's Gold came on. Psychedelic. You had Rennie and Manny, John Squire and Ian Brown in some wasteland. Who couldn't even tell? This trippy, dippy, incredibly confronting at the time music was on. And of course it's 10, 11 minutes long, so all the BBC could do was play a snippet. And I vividly remember my dad saying, "Is this music?" It's just staring ever since. And I didn't buy the record. It kind of came to me. So I had my cousin Mark. He was into it, although I think he didn't love it. I think he just did it because he was into it because it was cool. He was in the scene. And then as kind of I kind of got a little bit older and went to university, this record just became, everything. At times, I think this probably is the greatest record ever made. I just go down through the list. I Want to Be Adored, She Bangs the Drums, Waterfall. Is there a better opening three tracks on an album ever? I struggle. I saw them play in Ireland. This is when the Second Coming was released, and they played live the original lineup, and I went to see them. They played those first three tracks as the opening three tracks in the gig. I couldn't hear the band. All I could hear was the crowd singing every word back to them at the top of their voice. I imagine the Oasis tour next year will be somewhat similar. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was, you know, amazing. And then I Am the Resurrection, the closing track, the greatest pause in the history of recorded music. And then John Squire's just psychedelic wig out that just was trippy and amazing. So how did we get to this point? Look at this album sleeve. John Squire's painted this. The lemons represented what people would squeeze into their mouths to try and eradicate the effects of tear gas at student protests in the late 60s. This was a picture taken at a live recording with, what was his name? Tony Williams, the guy from Creation Records. Silvertone went out of business off the back of this band. I mean, the history of the Stone Roses is incredible. But the thing is, this album completely lives up to it. And this is an Australian first press, and this will be for sale on Wednesday. So part of the way that you get to the Stone Roses is through this next band. And that band is New Order. Now, this is one of my favourite New Order albums. This is typically opaque, but this is Brotherhood. I think it was 86 maybe. This is the Japanese first press of Brotherhood. This will also be for sale. Everything that you see here will be for sale on Wednesday evening. Brotherhood was New Order's, I think it was their fourth album, followed on, well, in between Technique and, what's the other one? I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but Brotherhood's somewhat of the, secondary level, maybe. New Order, people think, Technique and Power, Corruption and Lies is the other one, are kind of upper tier. Brotherhood was a bit quirky because it had one side that was quite guitar driven and one side that was quite synth driven. But that synth driven side included Bizarre Love Triangle, which has to be one of the great singles and has to be an influence on the Stone Roses. You get to the Stone Roses via the embrace of synth and pop and guitar on the likes of New Order. And the Japanese presses of New Order records are absolutely phenomenal. This is a brilliant, brilliant pressing. It sounds great. And it's also a great record. So you get a bit of New Order in the Stone Roses. I'm not going to draw a complete line to Stone Roses from this next band. But what you have in this next band is an incredible bass player. And so was Manny on Stone Roses. Often the bass line being the propulsive melody and John Squire's arpeggio style guitar being the flavour. And I'm talking about Rio, Duran Duran. What an album this is. I mean, it's right up there with, from me anyway. It's right up there with the best of the era, and incredible production quality, crazy good songwriting from start to finish, amazing sound quality, especially in these Japanese presses. I've had the UK, I've had the Aussie. The Japanese one just sounds better, and it's not particularly close. It just is. It's just awesome. Getting it into the Obi, which kind of, I love it when it bleeds into the sleeve. Rio from the off is just pop perfection, really. And what a sleeve too. It's just a wonderful, wonderful album. And so the early 80s is where we see the embrace of the synth and the embrace of the of alternative sounds. And so Rio is obviously completely mainstream. But what a band. They're awesome. Now the next band, this album, I think is the first of the albums that I think gets you to the Stone Roses, but maybe is not as famous as what I've talked about already, but in many ways is probably better. And that is this record. Now this particular pressing has got something cool about it, which I'm going to show you in a second. But this is Architecture and Morality by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. I think that this album has an argument to be the greatest synth album ever made. And that's with the proviso that it has some amazing guitar work as well. Opening track, The New Stone Age, is, if that had been a cool guitar band influenced by R.E.M. on college radio, I'd kind of believe it. But then it transitions into She's Leaving, and the synth line comes in, and you're like, oh my God, what world are we in here? Souvenir, surely Souvenir is up there with Rio, is one of the great pop hits. And what's deeply fascinating about this record is it sold over 4 million copies. This challenging, interesting, thoughtful record sold over 4 million copies. Joan of Arc, The Maid of Orleans, what a track that is. I love the design of the sleeve, the architecture of the sleeve, the playing off the words. It's beautiful. This is a UK first press, and it comes with this. This is an invitation to join the Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark UK fan club. If you would like to know more about Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark and receive regular, up-to-date news about their activities, why not join the fan club? Long way from joining the Facebook group. You had to send a check or a postal order for £4, or £4.50 if you lived in Europe, or £5 if you lived in the United States of America. And you could win some signed memorabilia, enter the competitions. But what a record that is. Man, if you don't know it, give it a spin. It's bloody awesome. All right. Another kind of way that you get, not linearly but tangentially, is the kind of embracing kind of counter-sexuality and counterculture. So you get bands, I'm actually going to pull one of these forward because it kind of makes sense to do so. You get the likes of Soft Cell, non-stop erotic cabaret, with, I guess off the back of one of the greatest cover versions of all time with Tainted Love. But here you get memorabilia, Where Does Our Love Go, What, and the quite incredible Sex Dwarf. And so, this regularly makes its way onto the list of, greatest gay albums of all time. But that is because it's transgressive, it's playful, but it's also challenging and thoughtful. And Mark Almond is just a ridiculously talented human being. So a great album, as was Adamant. Now, this kind of dress up, this idea that you could, not be a typical human being. You could be a cure head, or you could be into glam, or you could be, an ant. And, Kings of the Wild Frontier has this incredible chanting. It's rhythmic. It's really kind of, often kind of got some jazz sensibilities. It's really kind of weird that this was such a massive hit. It's really, you listen back, you're like, wow, what is this? The human beings making history, the Magnificent Five, they're all, effectively percussive kind of blunderbusses. And there he was doing his thing. Now, what I love about the UK press as well is it included this, which is the Adam and the Ant catalogue. So you get some pictures of what was a really cool live band. I mean, very early Adam and the Ants. You've got really cool new wave guitar tunes, but then this became the thing. So this is now the story of the band as per the catalogue. Look at these photos. Stand and Deliver. Stand and Deliver was the first single I remember buying. My mum says that I've added it here just because I think it's quite funny. I was talking to mum about this. She says I'm wrong. I didn't buy Stand and Deliver. I bought This Old House. Shakin' Stevens. She could well be right. It could well be that it was This Old House. Shakin' Stevens was the throwback to rock and roll. This album had been released under a previous name, and he'd released a single called Hey Nay, which is, I think, maybe it was Marie Marie, but it was a 50s rock and roll cover, and it kind of didn't do well. But then This Old House in 1980 went to number one, and I remember it being number one. I remember the single being in the house, but I think that I said to my mom, I was too young, surely I didn't buy this myself, and she's convinced that I did. But then This Old House went to number one, and they re-released the album, renamed it, and Quelle Surprise, you get a big hit. So Shakin' Stevens being, I think he was Scottish, a very, very early, oh no, he wasn't Scottish, I'll come to the Scottish bit, but he, I guess the ultimate one-hit wonder, but that became part of the UK scene. Adam and the Ant being far superior, but this book is really quite amazing, talking about all the different members of the band, but everyone remembers is Ant music. So there's the discography. So any Adam and the Ant fans out there, that is an unusual and lovely thing. Kings of the Wild Frontier, as well as Ant music, and of course, probably my favourite track on there, Dog Eat Dog. Continuing on, early 80s, you have the kind of, glam, Duran Duran, Adam and the Ant, but you also had ska. And so Madness, One Step Beyond, clearly one of the great debut albums. Playful, melodic, leaning off the culture of the Commonwealth. So music from Jamaica, from Barbados, but most importantly, music from London, where the melting pot was just happening and these incredible songs were coming together. One Step Beyond, My Girl, The Night Boat to Cairo, what a track. That is amazing. And so, great live band, obviously alongside the Specials, introduced the world to two-tone black and white, that dance. I remember doing it. They owned Top of the Pops in the UK in the 80s. They just owned it. It was amazing. All right, so another link to the Stone Roses is Elizabeth, My Dear, which is effectively a call. Is it a call to murder the Queen? It might well be, but it's certainly a point of view of the politics of the era that, being the royal family was just basically a cost, and what was the point of it? And one person who would have lined up behind that point of view was Billy Bragg. I reckon Billy Bragg listened to the lyrics of Elizabeth, My Dear, and went, I'm on board with that, my friends. Where do I sign up? Interestingly about Workers' Playtime, though, this was his third or fourth album. The politics of some of the earlier records are now interspersed with some of the greatest love songs that he ever wrote. I've got some friends back in the UK who think that Billy Bragg is the greatest songwriter ever and call on songs from this record as examples of that. The likes of She's Got a New Spell, I Paint You a Picture, and maybe the final track, Waiting for the Great Leap Forwards. The political tracks on here, I think, are the worst of the record. But the tracks about relationships and about male-female dynamic are wonderful. But that political left-leaning kind of anti-Thatcher, anti-royalty theme kind of through the undercurrent of the 80s leads you to a track like that on the Stone Roses debut album. I'm going to talk about these two acts as kind of concurrently here. This is the Thompson Twins, Quick Step and Side Guide, and this is Haircut 100 with Pelican West. Now, the reason I pull these two records out is because one of the reasons that the Stone Roses has kind of lived on with me as my music taste has evolved is it is a seriously funky record in places. And the Thompson Twins and the likes of Haircut 100 were obviously a very white type of funk, but they brought funk back into 80s pop. And with a melodic sensibility that absolutely is there in the Stone Roses. You know, Made of Stone and the melodies of those songs. The melodies on, that Nick Hayward pulled out of wherever he did it for that kind of early Haircut 100 era is incredible. Favorite Shirts, Fantastic Day. The track that opens side 2 is incredible. Really, really interesting records. Probably, I even think I like this one even more. The Thompson Twins. They had a couple of records that were kind of munged together to create a record that broke them in the US. So Love on Your Side, If You Were Here, Watching, kind of just really funky, interesting, deeply melodic pop music. And of course that was also where you got the likes of the Human League's Dare, Phil Oakey, and Trevor Horn producing ABC, The Lexicon of Love. These two records form the bedrock of any best of the 80s list just because of the production quality, of the melodic sensibility, of the embracing of kind of horns and production that really, were really driven. But the thing about that Dare record in particular by the Human League, obviously off the back, Don't You Want Me Baby, is it is a dark record. And there are parts of, all leading the way up to like the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays. So there is a darkness to, under culture and subculture, and those types of tracks kind of were really popular, amazingly popular. The likes of those tracks were on the radio, but they were deep songs that had, real clout, and those albums are absolutely superb. I went through this whole list and I realised that I had nothing from Scotland, which is kind of embarrassing because one of my favourite bands of the 90s is Teenage Fan Club. And so I just pulled out a couple of things that I guess a counterpoint to these really high quality records, in that you still had the likes of B.A. Robertson, this is Scottish singer-songwriter of 1980, and Wet Wet Wet, Scottish band, and this album, Holding Back the River, released in 1989. So these two records bookended the 80s. And I put them here because there's a reason why you need the likes of the Stone Roses. Because who in their right minds would want to listen to Wet 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 now? I mean, I kind of see why Marty Pellow and the crew were kind of palatable, kind of earworms, B.A. Robertson, kind of, I get it. But man, there was a time for the likes of the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses and Elastica and eventually Blur and Oasis to come through because, there was a purge needed. Anyway, I'm going to finish there. I'm at the 25-minute mark. There we go. There's a little potted history of music in the UK in the 80s. There's a lot, of course, that I don't have here. I don't have The Cure. I don't have Depeche Mode. But we know those bands. We know they're awesome. This is something that's a little bit different. And so I hope you enjoyed it. And obviously interested in your feedback, comments, as always. If you want to be on the price list, drop. This is a bunch of German presses. There's Greek. There's UK. I don't know if there's any Australian actually. But anyway, hopefully something there that at least intrigued you. You can go back and revisit the 80s with some perspective. And of course, there will be an Australian first press of the Stone Roses. Alrighty, thank you for listening. Subscribe, leave me a comment, or drop me an email, shortcutsrecordsaos@gmail.com. Au revoir.